Hello, we are Group E. Our topic is on the bombings of mainland Europe by British and American pilots. Let's get started.
Let's start with the basics. Obviously, the time period is during the World War II era, about 1939 through 1945. There are two sides, Allies and Axis powers. Britain, America, Soviet Union, and France were on one side, while Germany, Italy, and Japan were on the other. But that is another story. During the bombing of mainland Europe, British and American pilots were mostly targeting on Germany and Italy. Bombing on France to drive German forces out were rare. The leaders of three main countries were 1. Winston Churchill representing Great Britain, 2. Adolf Hitler representing Germany, and 3. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 32nd President of the United States of America. These leaders made a huge impact on the effort of World War II. Each leader had one thing in common. They always blamed the opposition to have started such attacks on enemy industrial cities.
Now we will move on to the British and American bombing groups. The British use a unit called the Royal Air Force, also known as the RAF. It is the Aerial Warfare Service branch of the British Armed Forces. The Marshal of the Royal Air Force was Sir Arthur Harris, commonly known as Bomber Harris. He was the mastermind of the indiscriminate area bombing on German cities from 1942 to 1945, during which over 8,500,000 tons of bombs were dropped on German cities by the RAF. It has been estimated that 600,000 German civilians were killed in the bombing raids plotted by Harris. The Royal Flying Corps, or the RFC, merged with the Royal Naval Air Service to form the RAF. Created on April 1st, 1918, it is most famous for being the oldest independent air force and playing a significant role in World War II. The United States Army Air Force, also known as the USAAF, was a bombardment group, or a group of bomber aircraft. It was the military aviation arm of the USA during World War II. It was created by President Roosevelt, but otherwise it was independent. One of its main tactics was to find groups of 3 or 4 squadrons. Its strategy involved precision bombing of industrial targets by heavily armed long-range bombers. The USAAF, too, was as successful as the RAF, though the unit's aerial shooting tactics differed.
Now moving on to the major bombing tactics. British were using a strategic bombing, which is also known for aerial attacks on the enemy's industry and civilian population. It was bound by the belief that attacks on civilians and private property was illegal and unjustifiable. Strategic bombing is also known for being able to dodge enemy fire. It is in direct daylight, heavy losses, and more supplies are needed. However, the British found this not useful, and it turned into nighttime area bombings of cities with orders told to break any enemy morale. On the other hand, the USAAF, or the U.S. Army Air Force, used flying raids from British bases to German cities from 1942 and remained faithful to the concept of around-the-clock offensives. This is another term for the attack on aerial cities. For the RAF is in night shift and USAAF is in daylight. They soon found out that from the USAAF attacks, the German civilians are weak in the direct daylight.
The Schweinfurt raid had two parts after the USAAF failed the first time. The US 8th Air Force insisted on precision daylight bombing as being most effective. However, that left the B-17 bombers having a high chance of losing to Luftwaffe, a German air force. Schweinfurt was attacked first on August 17, 1943. 230 B-17s left England, but the Luftwaffe had over 300 fighters available to oppose them, and only 184 B-17s bombed Schweinfurt, and 36 did not return to England. This was a heavy blow to the 8th Air Force. The ball-bearing factories had not been critically damaged. During the second raid, the USAAF was successful and managed to destroy most of the industrial sections of the town. Although only the ball-bearing factories had actually been targeted, collateral damage to the city center and surrounding areas were severe. Over half of the houses in Schweinfurt were left uninhabitable. The German city of Darmstadt, in the southwest of the country, suffered several bombing raids, mainly during 1943 and 1944. Of these, by far the most destructive was the attack on September 12, 1944, when the RAF carried out an intense attack. In comparison to the other German cities, Darmstadt was not a natural target. However, it contained a few industrial landmarks. Almost all of these homes were obliterated as a fierce fire raged. It had been estimated that 12,300 inhabitants lost their lives, and Germans held the raid as an example of RAF terror bombing.
The first RAF bombing attack on Berlin took place in December 1941. This involved a 4-hour flight over heavily defended areas, and Bomber Command lost 10% of the aircraft employed in the raid. Although Air Marshal Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, came under heavy pressure from Winston Churchill, he refused to carry out attacks on Berlin throughout 1942 because of the high-risk target from long distances. Once the most industrialized and capital 50 of Germany was down, German people lost a lot of their hope. Some quotes to think about. In the burning and devastated cities, we daily experience the direct impact of war. It spurred us to do our utmost. The bombing and the hardships that resulted from them did not weaken the morale of the populace. Albert Speer, Chief of German War Economy. How could a nation that was once so proud of its high moral standards drop bombs on innocent women and children, bringing them into war as well? Anonymous. Thank you for paying attention and listening to our groups.